Today we will be covering AI maturity levels and data platforms. My name is Walter, I will be your host for today, and I'm joined here by, on the right hand side, Diederik Geveling, CTO of Xebia Data Solutions.
Thank you for having me, Walter.
Great having you here, Diederik. And on the left hand side we have Steven Nooyen, lead AI strategist at Xebia Data.
Thanks, Walter, for the introduction.
Before we dive into today's topic, Steven, you're head of data and AI strategy.
Yeah.
What does that mean exactly? What do you do on a daily basis?
Yeah, so I'm currently working already for 5 years at GoData Driven, part of Xebia. And before that, I was working at Accenture as a management consultant. And I noticed during my career that when I was working in the data and AI field, I was programming, but more and more my management consulting background came back. And more questions were asked by clients on how to organize for data and AI. So we started a strategy team at GoData Driven, and we help organizations with how do you organize well to become successful with data and AI. And why is that important? You can buy a data platform. Everybody has a data platform these days, almost every client. Everybody has data scientists. There are coming a lot of them on the market through the universities these days. But still, we're not always capturing the value. So we need something in the way we organize ourselves in an operating model or a strategy company-wide. There's more necessary outside IT that we need to arrange to become successful. And that's what we are doing in our team.
And does it also mean that you implement those strategies at organizations?
Yes, definitely. And actually, as GoData Driven, we are strongest in our implementation. So we have always created data platforms, worked on data and AI products. And I think it's these hands-on lessons from the implementation phase that makes our strategy more concrete, realistic, pragmatic. And that's what clients appreciate. And so we write the strategy to implement it. And we will love to do that too.
Also, are those predominantly smaller companies, scale-ups, larger organizations? Does it matter?
No, it doesn't matter. I think the key is to have a strategy, and I've helped a scale-up where I coach 1 day a week, give the client homework, and then the week after I come again and guide the company through their journey. But we have also done more than half a year strategy projects with over €1 billion revenue companies, where we have to talk to 100 stakeholders. So we do all sizes. Yeah.
All right. Well, today we're going to pick your brain on those experiences.
Yeah, hopefully I can help.
I'm sure you can. Moving on to the other side of the table, Diederik.
Yes, Walter.
You've been in data for a while?
Indeed, I've been in data for some time. So I've been working for, Xebia Data now for the last, I think, 5 years. Started off as a data engineer. My background is also in the computing science. Did indeed a lot of these implementations, right? So setting up data platforms. Also, of course, landing data products into production, which is generally the harder part. And I did that for a few years, and then last year I made the change to CTO basically, so Chief Technology Officer of GoData Driven Solutions. And this is basically a new proposition which we have, where we aim to create tailored to fit data platforms, MLOps platforms, but also streaming fast data platforms.
Yeah, you have an interesting passion, and that's to simplify data platforms.
Well, yeah, indeed. Basically, to remove some of the pains which we saw when we were actually still deploying this stuff. So what we mainly saw in the past, that it took us like 3-4 months to deploy a platform, and everything was custom as well. But over time, we saw that most of these platforms, 70-80% is basically the same. Especially if you work on a certain cloud, there's only so many ways you can do this. So we decided to, let's say, standardize this a little bit in the form of templates, which we basically deploy at our clients and then modify them up to their requirements. And that, not only does it save us a lot of time, but it also saves a lot of time for the client, and we can much faster focus on the use cases and actually creating value for the client itself.
Yeah, it must be music to your ears, Steven.
We're both value creators.
Okay, so you agree on this end.
Yeah.
So far, so good.
That's we're still in one line here. So
We're still a team.
Yeah, still a team. Okay, so that's good. As a team, looking at the organization that you're part of, it's a Xebia organization. It consists of several domains, and data is one of them. But for example, cloud and software development, digital transformation, and strategy, academy are also part of that. What's the value of having that in one organization? Do you work together often with the other domains?
Yeah, I think we do. It depends a little bit on what the scope is of the assignment, but often you see that the data and the AI platform takes such a central place in IT's infrastructure at the client that there's also other questions with regards to, for example, integration services between data sources. Then it helps that we have a software development group, for example. But there's also a big dependency on cloud platforms. So we have cloud specialists from all the big cloud providers. It helps that we have sister companies with good experience in the IT landscape.
Yeah, the reason for asking is that I can imagine that organizations typically don't have all of these specialisms in-house.
Yeah.
So I also wonder, are there any dependencies? Do you need to have huge teams to become successful with data and AI? And which is something that I think we will also explore along the levels of AI maturity.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it depends on the company size probably. A big corporate needs quite a huge team, but a skill I think with some standard cloud services can already start pretty quickly.
Yeah.
I should note though that even at the larger companies we generally tend to start relatively small, right?
Yeah,
so it's I think that's one of the key things.
Yeah.
And so working agile also doesn't really mean getting into starting with a team of like 40, 60 people. Yeah. But generally relatively small and then scaling up, right?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Often you see for big corporates that you start within a data lab or a center of excellence or something, and then it scales out gradually with the company maturing. Yeah. So exactly. You're right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it makes sense to dive into those AI maturity levels first, and then look into the more specifics of technology and data platforms.
Yeah. And then we'll bring them together, I think, in the end, in some concrete examples of companies where technology and organization fit together.
Yeah, nice.
Great.
Yeah.
So on the screens, might be also on the monitors behind me. Would be helpful if they are there, but otherwise we have some screens here.
Yeah, they're coming.
And you probably know all about those levels, so you don't need those visualizations.
No, I dream about these visualizations.
Yeah, because what we're looking at here are the levels of AI maturity.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, this is coming from our white paper, the AI maturity journey, and it's called a journey and not a model, because this is kind of how we have seen our clients mature through the data and AI field over the last couple of years. And we've seen them grow in a couple stages. I think when I joined Xebia 4 or 5 years ago, lots of companies were in the initialization phase. So they all wanted to do something with data, but they didn't know how. They needed to start. They all did proof of concepts, proof of values, show some value quickly. That matured over time.
Burn it.
Huh?
Burn it.
Yeah, try out. Yeah, try the money. Try to find the money.
And not always. There was value, I think, from those proof of concepts.
But almost all of the time, companies knew that there will be value if they would continue. And I think many stakeholders, in executive boards, were more. They needed a little. They realized that they needed to start, and they were okay with burning money in the first phase, as long as at some point there will be a good use case, and they will learn and progress along that journey.
Yeah, I say it a bit jokingly, but at the time the market was so immature that everyone had to invent the wheel, right?
Yeah, I think what the phase that is definitely over from that time was that the idea that data is gold, and as long as you store it in a platform, it will generate value automatically. Now, these days we definitely say start with the use case and capture data only for that use case, and that's a lot more cost efficient and straight ahead to your goal, rather than just storing everything first. Yeah.
So let's take a quick tour along this journey.
Yes.
What phases are there?
Yeah. So the initialization phase I already quickly talked about. That grew for many companies through like a small data lab or a center of excellence called continuous experimentation. We call that. One use case became 2 use cases, became 3 use cases, 4 use cases, and you will see scaling benefits, right? So you can reuse the technology stack, you can reuse data sets that you already prepped once, you can reuse templates for going to production. So there's it's a big jump in, if you look at this chart, in the analytical capability direction. So the technical way of working with data. An analytical capability, what we mean is like people, tools, and data. So yeah, the things you need for an insight. Then we have seen companies grow towards what we call an enterprise empowerment phase, and it's more a step in the other direction, so the horizontal direction. And this is more a business step to do. So you'll have to grow in implementation, funding, and executive sponsorship. I'll get to those drivers a bit later.
Sure.
But on the business axis. So a typical client that I helped, I was in the Center of Excellence, but now they wanted to bring data science to each of the departments. So this was an airline, so it meant from Center of Excellence to data science in finance, data science in HR, data science in cargo, data science in commercial. So going to a hub-spoke model, kind of like decentralizing data science.
Hub-spoke model?
Yeah, that's what happened in that phase, because you had the hub of the continuous experimentation,
right,
where you had all the specialists, but now you wanted to bring it to the people, so to the spokes, and you'll help them with the best practices from the Center of Excellence.
Okay. Yeah.
And now, and I think you'll see that a lot as a CTO of data platforms, we are going to a data democratization phase, wherein companies ask us to give a data platform and the abilities for everyone in the organization to use data. So that's a completely new step in both directions, because on the one hand you need to mature your tech stack to make sure that data analytics is accessible for everyone. So data needs to be of good quality, documented in a data dictionary. Health of data needs to be monitored. But also, people need to use that data. So you need to do a lot on the business side to educate people, to make sure that use cases are not done twice. And so that's why it's a step in both directions. And that's a step I think we're making in the Netherlands at the moment.
Yeah. So then you may talk about data democratization.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
You recognize that in this step?
I do, of course. So you see, you see that a lot of companies are still at different levels, basically. But you see this question popping up more and more, and it's also like the example which you gave. So for example, data scientists within marketing, data scientists within finance, data scientists within HR. I see that question is mainly coming from your base analytics within all of these departments, so not needing to go to data scientists anymore to get certain insights.
Yes.
But basically, the people working with Excel, they should also be able to, get these insights themselves, basically. And I'm not saying that, that it needs to go to the whole organization, right? There's of course a limit there. Yeah. But I think that we're slowly moving towards that path, and that will, make that will also remove some bottlenecks, let's say, in the current systems which we have.
Yeah, I completely recognize that. Like upskilling people and making sure that more people can do that, and you're not dependent on a central team anymore.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's that's also a big challenge, right? So you're already mentioning upscaling. I think that's. It takes a lot of convincing as well.
Yes.
So this is the process for like a few weeks. I really think that this is a process for a year, 2 years, right, before you get to that level. Yeah,
hence why the importance of strategy now comes into play a bit more. I think many companies realize that within this continuous experimentation phase and enterprise empowerment, and in this journey, they were just playing it quite ad hoc, maybe, looking a year ahead, but technology was evolving so fast and we didn't know how to deal with data and analytics and AI all the time. But now it's stabilizing a little bit, and companies realize, okay, let's just make a 3-year roadmap or a 5-year roadmap, and let's look at it in a longer term horizon. Yeah. And then upskilling suddenly becomes possible.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think there's more to that, right? So like you said, before, companies were doing just very large migrations, right? And they said, let's just first migrate all data and then start creating value, right? Yeah. I think also part of that strategy is just accepting, like, hey, we're not going to do that because the first year we would just be shifting over data and that's about it. We want to have, this strategy should be focused around, well, of course, use cases, but also, upskilling, etc., etc.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And do you see that in practice a lot, that organizations do run these upskilling programs, AI, data literacy programs?
Yes, we help them also. For a large bank in the Netherlands, we are upskilling 5,000 people. So we have a particular course called Analytics Translation, which is kind of like an entry course about analytics and data for business people, being able to translate the business domain and the data analytics domain. So the Analytics Translator course we gave to 5,000 people. But there are also many other corporates that we create, for example, in-house e-learning modules for. And they make the e-learning about data analytics obligatory. So people have to follow it. And then there's, of course, follow-up steps for people that are more interested in the variety of levels. But yeah, big academy programs, we see it a lot.
And it's not just, let's say data domain encapsulated, right? I'm seeing, at least what I'm seeing is that we're slowly slipping also in different engineering domains. So for example, cloud engineers, they also start to understand data better, understand how to set up data and data infrastructures. Yeah. But also understand that generally the designs around data are just a little bit different than what you would see in traditional setups, basically.
Yeah, I think also traditional product owners that are used to work with features for like websites, they have also experienced this, that a feature for data science is not as straightforward as a feature for a website, because you might encounter all kinds of data quality issues along the way that you didn't envision up front, which delays enormously the backlog and the sprint that you planned the work for. So indeed, also I think one category of people that is adjusting to this field is the product owners.
I like that one. So one of the things which I always say, first just establish a baseline, right? So get something in which might be, rather poor, but then you have a start, and then you start building on top of it, which, of course, with a feature on a website, that's totally different, right? I mean, you make it nice, you make sure that it's up to a certain level, and then you continue. Yeah, I
agree.
And I think within data, that's just a little bit different as well. It's way more iterative. It's way more,
explorative maybe as well?
Explorative maybe,
yeah, exactly that as well,
And the feature can be scoped easily because you know exactly what it needs to do and how you get there. But the data is a bit, if you spoke about gold, but you never know what you're going to find, right?
Sometimes it might be just junk.
Yeah. And then it's a good thing to find that early on in the process.
True.
There's generally more coal than there's gold within data, but it is there, the gold, right? You just have to find it.
Dig deep.
Yeah, exactly. And in another instance, you might need coal at some point as well. So it's good to store data, but also to look at the data quality for the purpose that you were after.
Yeah.
And in the last phase, as I take it, everyone in the organization should know how to distinguish between coal and gold.
Yeah.
And take decisions based on that.
Or maybe not being able to distinguish it themselves, but if you have a nice data catalog, then your catalog will tell you this is a good source and this isn't.
Yeah. Great stuff. And moving on, because we've been talking about those analytical capabilities, but also the adoption in the business is really important. Yeah. But that depends on a lot of factors, I suppose. Yeah,
to make it more tangible for our customers, we have written the journey, we've broken it down into these drivers. And for each of the drivers, we mention immature practices and mature practices. And you can use that to rank yourself on how you're doing across all of these drivers.
People can do that themselves.
They can do that themselves if they go to the white paper. We also have a self-assessment on the website, so you can just click it, and then you also get an assessment of how you're doing. Do note that if you ask us, we have way more drivers and way more practices, so we will do a way more deep, thorough assessment.
Yeah, but to
get a quick
aware.
scan, it's nice to get a feeling of it, to do the self-assessment.
And you divided that into certain dimensions, analytical capability and the business adoption, as well as certain drivers, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so I already briefly mentioned the dimensions on the previous slide because those were the two axes. But here on the business adoption side, I think those are the newest one. Probably everybody can imagine something with people, tools, and data. But on the business side, executive support is the extent to which leadership goes after or strives after success with data and AI without leadership convinced of that, I'm pretty confident you will not make it. Or we have seen that at clients. Funding is also super important because clients where immature practices, we have seen that everything is funded from like an IT budget. But the mature practices, the business themselves pay for all the initiatives because the business wants to get the ROI. So you also see that in the mature case, a chief data officer is not part of IT, but reports to, for example, chief executive officer, and is reporting to the business lines instead of the IT line. So funding says a lot, and then also implementation is the extent to which you early on test for value to make sure that you're not continuing too long with an initiative that's not valuable.
Now here you're mentioning this role of CDO.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, it makes me think, okay, what does a data-driven organization look like? What kind of roles do you have and who do they report to? But on the other hand, we also spoke about smaller organizations versus larger organizations.
Yeah.
Do all organizations need a CDO, or does it come into scope later on?
Yeah. I think if you start working with data analytics, you should. It's not always someone in the executive board. It can also be a global head of data, in the sense that it's like a management team -2 level or a management team -1 level. But ideally, this person has a sponsor in the executive board for data, so that at least data analytics is on the agenda of the executive board and is discussed regularly. And I think a chief data officer is then someone that's doing this full time, right? And reporting back to the executive board.
So you see it a lot at scale-ups already, basically, right? So there generally you also already have a relatively small data team where you have a head of data, maybe 1, 2 data scientists, and maybe 1, 2 data engineers. But then the earlier you start with that, the less of a painful process it becomes later on, right? Because these are generally the people who try to convince the rest of the organization to be data-minded. But it also, makes you a little bit ready for the future as well.
Yeah, and a concrete example also is a bigger corporate that we work for. They don't have a CDO, but they have a chief operations officer responsible for new use cases and data and operations, and they have and the maintenance side, and then they have a chief transformation officer who's a bit more on the change aspect, but also so the data agenda is shared between both. What's the effect of that in practice? Data scientists in the transformation office, they develop a model, and then when the model needs to go to production, they just throw it over the shelf to the operations team. But they don't know how the model was developed, how to maintain it. They don't know the specifics of it, and that means the use case never flies because nobody is really responsible. Yeah. So that's where you see a chief data officer would have been nice to have. Actually, a must-have. Yeah,
and the worst thing about it is generally that both teams work agile as well, right? So you already have some agile practices, but then still you have some kind of waterfall structure in between, right? Where it's literally thrown
over the fence.
Yeah. I think you might bump into that you have your AI strategy and you've went through this whole model, you mapped out where does the organization need to go, how can they mature. But then you're not standalone. There's other departments as well that have their way of working, their methodology. You have Agile somewhere, but not throughout the whole organization. DevOps is not implemented in the right way. How do you go about that? Or do you come across it?
Sure. Maybe it's nice if you skip 2 slides to and then I can talk about the approach of how we do data strategy. So I think the wrong approach will be is that within your IT or data department, you come up with a whole data strategy for the entire organization, but you do not talk to the entire organization. So then you will start implementing, and you will encounter these kind of situations where the organizational circumstances are not right for becoming successful with data analytics. So we turn it around. We say you don't need to start within IT, but you start within the business side. We start talking to the entire executive board, all the different business line managers. What do you want to achieve with data? So the big vision of the company. Then we ask their managers 1 step below, what specific use cases would work in your business line? And then we think, okay, knowing what the organization wants to achieve and how mature the business lines are, okay, what do we need to arrange on the data side to make it work for those teams? And you have to buy in from the business from the start, and they will also make sure that the circumstances are right for success.
Yeah, but I think it is important, right, that the person who goes into the business is actually has a strong background within data. Right?
Yeah, so I think ideally this will be that CDO or head of data person leading the initiative for a data strategy, but with strong support from an executive and starting at the executive level.
Exactly, because so many times we see in the industry that the business comes up with use case which just aren't possible, right? Because the data isn't there, or the company doesn't have the technical capability yet. And of course, you can work to that point, but there's always expectations and timelines versus what is actually achievable.
Yeah, so I think if you have a good sense of this bottom box, what is achievable and what are realistic timelines, what works well and what doesn't, when you're working hands-on with data, then you can more attach realistic timelines to such a roadmap. But what you describe, the business comes up with use cases that are like almost impossible for the moment. Those we would like to capture, because if you're talking about a strategy it's for 3 or 5 years. So we are hoping to enable all the checks to make that use case possible, because that's what the business thinks they're going to win the game with. So we need to enable that particular one use case.
That's true, yeah.
But we need their buy-in and we need their support, and it takes time.
Yeah, but then it comes with a lot of expectation management as well, right? So
it does, yeah. But we see that all the business leaders, they believe in it and they want to invest, and they're most often they're convinced of doing it.
Yeah.
Even though it requires an investment of 5 million over 3 years or something. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's interesting.
Yeah. Steve, when we look at the AI maturity levels, we talk about business adoption.
Yeah.
We have a nice equalizer here. Yeah. And you see that the components, there's some variation throughout the different phases.
Yeah. Depending on the phase, you need to focus on something else. Early on, you need to really have the right people on board to make sure you can prove the value. And you have that executive sponsor to make sure that you will get more investment after that first proof of value. Then in the continuous experimentation phase, the focus is on implementation, because if you're having more and more use cases, you need to capture all those benefits.
What does implementation mean exactly? What do people do then?
Yeah, so it's more on the business side of a use case. So, for example, you have a product recommender on your website. You're only going to capture benefits if you see an uplift in the amount of products sold in a cart basket or more baskets on the website. So you need to do an A/B test and implement a product and see if the B, your new product recommender, is better than the A without the product recommender. And then once it does, you turn over. So that's an easy implementation, I think, because it's just a switch in the website. But most often the implementation is a lot harder, right? So if you have a churn model predicting which customers are going to churn, you give it to your marketing department, then your loyalty department, your customer department, they will need to call or make specific offers to the clients that you think are going to churn. But if they don't do that well, or they don't do it at all, then you're not going to capture the benefit of the insight of people going to churn. So that's what I mean with implementation.
Yeah, follow the data.
Use the data.
And follow it along with how it advances through the organization.
Yeah.
Right, because marketing or loyalty departments should also use it in the right way. So they need some support with that.
It's about the end user.
Yeah. Okay, then you move on, and then the orange stands out, funding.
Yeah, I kind of said that. So when you're gonna decentralize data to your spokes in your organization, the spokes need to pay for it because it's not fundable centrally anymore, and you want the spokes to be responsible for their return on investment.
So in the initial 2 phases, funding is important, but it's managed centrally, or is it not that important?
It's not as important at all, because often the initialization phase and continuous experimentation phase are still like a pet project almost of one director or executive that really believes in data and wants to show the value. And often this person gets a budget for it to prove it and show it, and that's sufficient.
Okay, so at that point it's overseeable, and the shareholders won't get restless when they know what's happening.
No, not yet.
Not yet.
I think it comes later, right? Because the investment becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. Yeah. And if you all keep that central, then it's just not, it won't fly. Okay,
so in enterprise empowerment, data initiatives are no longer centrally organized, but they find their way to the
you empower the enterprise, so you
To the spokes.
to the decentral business
Okay.
teams,
Yeah.
and they need to start. They will hire data scientists. They will hire engineers because. Diederik said it, like a marketing department wanting to do more with data.
Yeah.
They probably don't want to be dependent on a central team anymore, because every time they do need to do a request, hey, can I have an engineer or a scientist for this purpose? Yeah, the people are busy, so it takes time. I think you will get to that problem a bit later in the show. But it's better if you then hire someone yourself. So we see that a lot.
Still, I think it's good to mention that this also has to do with how the company itself develops, right? So, for example, if we still talk about scale-ups, then generally having this central team is sufficient, right?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, because marketing is 2 people,
Sure,
right?
sure.
HR is 2 people.
Yeah.
But the moment you get to a few hundred people
Yeah.
range, then this starts to become very interesting.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, so maybe, like you say, maybe not all companies of all sizes go through this journey. So maybe this is more catered towards a bit more medium-sized to big-sized companies. If you're a scale-up in that sense, you might be fine with a central team for quite a long time.
And perhaps you skip a phase because it is already in your genes to be data-driven.
Yeah. Sometimes it could. Yeah, some startups or scale-ups, they are democratized from the start. They ask all their employees, even in HR departments, to be able to do SQL.
It was already years ago that Uber being proficient in SQL was one of the requirements for people who work
hard
there.
requirement.
Requirement, yeah. Do you see that a lot?
No, no. But if you see it more in the scale-up and tech-native companies.
Yeah.
Is that a good thing?
Sure. Maybe. Yeah. I think it's a luxury thing because those people are really scarce, right? So if you're more of a traditional company, then you have to educate your people. You can't just say goodbye to all your traditional employees.
No,
you also don't want to do that because they don't have all the business knowledge in-house. So you better provide them with the skills and the technology to start doing that.
Yeah. But later when we will be looking at the data platforms, there's all kind of steps in that process. And you also see that you have different roles and different people responsible for every step. And the data becomes available in many ways for the business.
Yeah. Correct. Yeah.
And one thing that I notice here is that, for example, tools technology are important in most of the phases. In enterprise empowerment, a bit less. But those tools and technology remain relevant as you advance.
There's almost always something to do on the tools and tech side. In the initialization phase, you might just be well off with spinning up a SageMaker notebook in AWS cloud might be sufficient to show your value. But if you go into continuous experimentation, you need to have a production environment. So that's already a big step in technology. Enterprise environment a bit less because you already worked a lot on your tooling best practices, and now you're just gonna use it a lot more across the organization. So kind of the same stack, but used more often. And then in the last phase, you can democratize data. So the data and the tooling really need to take a big step for self-service, data catalog, monitoring data health and quality. Because if you're having bad data quality and you're democratizing data, then there's a high chance that there will be multiple versions of the truth and people will be misinterpreting data. And you'll only have very bad discussions about what data is really true.
Okay, so I'm also curious to learn more about the tools and technology.
Yeah.
Diederik, that's pretty much your cup of tea.
That's my part. Yeah.
That's your part.
Yeah.
And enlighten us about data platforms. What's the evolution of them?
Well, it's always an interesting discussion, right? Especially what we just talked about. Indeed, so you have that whole AI maturity, and I think there's also, let's say, a maturity path that you see in your data stack, basically. And for me, at least, what I see from experience, that it always starts with enabling something with a piece of infrastructure, and then you can start landing use case on top of it, and basically creating value from those use cases. So then you're already in the experimentation phase, but before you get there, you still need at least 8 pieces of infrastructure, right? So it's either we talk about, well, SageMaker is a good example. It can be, Data Robot, it can be, Vertex AI, which is a nice tool as well to use. But it always starts somewhere. So that's why, whenever I, try to explain this a little bit, you always have, a part where you provision the infrastructure, and then you get in your and then you get in your data, value creation cycle. And of course, it's not that black and white, right? Of course, you keep, improving your infrastructure. You keep adding features, but we generally see that with the moment you do more complex use case, then first you need to also make your infrastructure a little bit more complex.
Yeah.
So that's where it starts. And the question is like, because we talk about the road to the, let's say, to the modern data stack. And what we see from this graph is that the provisioning of infrastructure also becomes shorter, right? So where before we were talking, we were building relatively complex, data warehouses, data lakes. We see that the tooling is becoming more available, easier to use, but also basically, there's less operational burden. And if you go to the next slide, then. I can tell you a little bit of why we're seeing that, right? So, for example, self-service is really on the rise. I mean, you mentioned this already a few times, but the question is, where does it actually come from, right? And we saw in the past that there were quite some challenges. So you had companies like for example, a large hotel booking website, which was really good in, or they are really good in data science, but they also have a very complex infrastructure to support that. And there are more companies in the world. Also, the larger clouds have exactly the same, right? But what we were seeing was that for 80%, 90% of the companies in the world, that wasn't really achievable, right? Because it was generally very complex. You need very large teams, to maintain it, but you also need to find those teams and hire them, et cetera. So these type of setups worked very, very well. But we saw that for those 90% of the other companies, that there were quite some challenges. And you see a few, on the screen, where, for example, we often saw that there were central bottlenecks, right, where you had 1-2 data engineers spinning up a whole data infrastructure, but then they got bombarded by requests, etc., and also improvements. The same for a central data science team, right? Where you're seeing the moment that starts to go, they generally also get bombarded with requests, and that was, partly because of course the procedures around it weren't that mature yet, but partly also because we created that bottleneck because only those people can build this, can maintain and build this type of complex infrastructure. And we also saw that came with a lot of operational burden as well. And that's why we see more and more cloud infrastructure coming up, because that's just, it's generally easier to maintain, or you need to maintain less, basically. And also the systems start to
as a user,
easier.
you need to maintain
as
less.
A user. And also the systems are, so I'm not saying that they're becoming less complex. I'm just saying that they are, let's say, easier to achieve the same goal, basically. And then, of course, we still had the domain immaturity part, right? We're still a relatively new field, if you compare it to software engineering or other fields. And I think that's also, we're getting more mature over time. Yeah. And I think those, these 4 challenges basically forced us to look into, to have the next generation data platforms, the next generation data infrastructure.
Yeah, so this is mostly for the data platform itself, and does this also apply to bringing use cases to the business?
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
So do the same challenges apply?
Of course, not all challenges, but some do indeed, right? So if you talk about the central bottleneck, so if you have 2 data scientists and you have 10 or 15 data science use cases which you want to do, then you need to come up with a good procedure around that, right? And like Steve said, it's nicer if every team can get 1 or 2 data scientists, but they're still able to work on the same stack. You need to enable that, right? And that's these type of improvements which we've been seeing, which enables this, yes. Yeah, and of course we saw more improvements over time, right? So, where before we had complex on-prem stack which needed to maintain by a relatively large team. We're now seeing, for example, a big one which is always mentioned still, but I think most viewers already know it, is of course, the separation between storage and compute, meaning that if I want to do something with data science or I want to do data transformations, I just spin up my resources, do whatever, and then I delete them again, and then I don't have any maintenance there. So that means that with a smaller team, I can actually achieve the same, right? Because the maintenance of those resources just disappears. And basically we store the data on, we call it serverless, but there's always servers in the background, but for the user it's serverless. And then you don't really have to think about it anymore, because these are generally zero ops products, as we call them.
And lower cost.
Lower cost
to
as well,
operate.
of course, because compute is expensive, right? The storage is cheap. And of course there are, cheap is relative, because you can still have a lot of data. That's also what Steven mentioned. Like, we need to start thinking about, do we still store all data, or are we going to do use case based?
Yeah.
But generally, compute is more expensive. Yeah.
It's a bit of sidestep, but we touched on funding and how much money is involved in becoming an AI-driven organization. Who do you reckon is responsible for the spend on cloud and developing data applications?
You mean who's responsible within the organization?
Yeah.
You mean,
Yeah.
So that's a very interesting question, right? So I think there are two things here, right? You always have your base layer, and any base layer is being built by a for example, cloud center of excellence, which
Central
creates
budget.
Exactly, which creates a landing zone, right? But that landing zone should enable this, this distributed, let's say this distributed infrastructure, right? Where if a team wants to basically do a data science use case or do something with data, they should just be able to request, hey, give me my data platform, right? And then they will be paying for that as well, because it's all part of the use case and the business use case. So then, for example, marketing would still be paying part of the cloud costs, right? And nowadays you can actually track that quite nicely. So for example, in the Google Cloud, what we did for one of our clients, that you could actually track per user how much they were spending, right?
Nice.
Both on compute, but as well as storage and the data that they were generating.
And in the implementation of a strategy, is this also something that you talk about with a CDO or with a CEO?
Yeah, definitely. And exactly the way Diederik mentions, right? So you'll need to have some central budget for cloud fundament, the basics, and then we talk about how you can apply proper tagging to make sure that a decentral team pays for whatever they use. And that's then we make a business case for each use case, and this is part of the costs. There are benefits, hopefully they outweigh the costs. If not, they don't get an own platform. Simple as that. And what we talk to in a strategy to make sure that this value is captured is we apply often a stage gate process, right? So upfront the business case is made, but like after half a year we evaluate if the case is made, and after a year we track the value again. So if the value is not generated of the use case, then at some point you can pull the plug and decommission the infrastructure and cloud spend again. And then you've tried, but you're not bound to a structural investment in on-premise costs that maintain there. Right. So you can just scale it down and it's done.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Because before, when you were building on-prem infrastructure, if I wanted to get extra resources to take about 2 months or something, right?
Yeah, I also remember those.
It's the click of a button and I get my resources. So you also see there that means that you can do fast experimentation, right?
And at the same time, it's also a danger because many clients, they're not mature enough to realize that they need to turn off the clusters if they're not using it, for example, in the night or in the weekend. So we often see really quick gains in just managing the cloud spend.
I can imagine that this happens a lot.
It happens a lot.
It happens a lot. But if you use one of our platforms, then you don't have that issue anymore, because we of course built that in. But indeed, we see in the industry that happens a lot still.
That's why those companies become rich, of course. But if you are clever enough, you'll apply a business rule that turns off clusters at night and in the evening automatically. That will already save you a lot of spend.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But there's more tricks to it. Huh? It's just one example of how you, even though the infrastructure is way more better to manage than like a Hadoop cluster on-premise, there's still some engineering involved and some capabilities of that you need to have to do it clever. But it's simplified a lot. Yeah.
Well, what might be interesting in another episode to dive more into cost optimization and manage cost of data platforms.
A known talk on itself. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks for the tip already. Diederik, you spoke about evolution of data platforms, serverless side of the platform, compute separated from storage. So if we look at the architecture of a modern data platform, could you describe the elements that you typically would see there?
Yeah, so you see it indeed on the screen. So like I said, some of the tooling is just starting to become more simple. So I think that at some point in time, we had the realization that, if you want to do data democratization, then the tooling also needs to become simpler, right?
Yeah.
And I also made that mistake a few years ago. I was still, everything will become, a programming language like Python, like Scala, etc. But that's just too complex, right? So you want to have something simpler. And we see now that, for example, SQL becomes a standard where you still want to do data transformations, for example.
And that's in those spokes.
In those spokes, correct. Yeah, and so what you see on the screen is generally, one of your what we call the modern data stack, where you always have part of your ingestion, which is certain tooling which moves the data into your data lake or data warehouse. Then the data is stored over there. You can do certain transformations there, generally with also tools like dbt, which are of course SQL based, and then those results are served somewhere. So in this case, we describe it a little bit simpler, where it generally serves to, for example, a dashboarding layer, where an analyst can, display the results. But for example, it can also be moved on towards some towards a machine learning layer, right, where the data scientists will then start using it. So you see a few of these tools over there, but as well as together with that, we see on supporting layer, right? So we see data quality and of course observability there. So tools like Soda SQL, Data Vault, also Monte Carlo, right? These are tools where you can say, okay, I want to increase the quality of my data by performing tests, monitoring your data set, monitoring shifts over your data, etc., etc. But this should also be accessible tooling, right? Yeah. So stuff which you should be able to do in SQL, or which you should be able to set up relatively easy.
What I think interesting about this chart is there's so many new names compared to like 2 years ago, for example. But maybe it's nice if you talk to the listeners about, for example, why Fivetran and Snowflake got in there. Why are these so successful now?
So that is a good question, right? So there are rather multiple reasons for that, right? So one of the reasons why Fivetran, Stitch, Airbyte, or of course GCP data fusion are coming up now is because we moved from basically ETL towards ELT. So what does that mean? That before, what we were doing is we had a database over here. We wanted to load the data somewhere else. And in the process of loading the data in, right, so copying it, we also did transformations there. And slowly we started to understand, like, this is wrong, right? Because that makes that process extremely complex. And it also means that process is always custom, because those transformations that you're doing are generally different between companies, but also between systems.
And that's a blocker.
That's a blocker, yeah, definitely, or it just takes more time.
Yeah, it requires engineering. Yeah,
exactly. However, if we remove the transformation step and we just do the extract loading, then suddenly we can standardize it, right? There's only one way to move data from MySQL to BigQuery, basically. So of course, from a technical standpoint, there are multiple ways, but generally, you do it in the same way, right? It's not like you're going to for the technical viewers, cast into a string generally. That's not something that you do, right? So, and that's why we see the rise of, for example, these tools. And it also means that I do not need to develop or maintain it anymore. So that's 2 data engineers less in my team. Or I can spend those data engineering resources on the data products and data use cases that actually create value from a company. Because just loading data into a data lake, it doesn't create value, right? It's a use case. on top of it. And that's one of the reasons why we're seeing these type of tooling.
Yeah, I think this really revolutionizes the field. You know, every company has Salesforce, and every company has SAP, and Fivetran just has a standard default connector for it, or Azure Data Factory, or Stitch or Airbyte. And you can just click, done, get the data from here to there. It's done. You don't need a hardcore engineer or anything. This is really speeding up the whole process.
Of course, and we're also seeing, of course, there's still improvements there, right? So, for example, what we're now seeing is that slowly, you know, these tools will also start to support data catalogs, right? So, if you use Fivetran, you can specify a data catalog, and then we'll also add already the information there about the data, which is basically migrating, right? So that's a very nice thing to have, basically.
Yeah, for example, DBT tracks the lineage of your transformations, which can also populate the data dictionary. So the field is making it more easy here.
Exactly, while still being relatively easy to use, right? So still, you know, DBT is SQL based, which is approachable, and in our field, well, so I don't. Of course, you have very complex SQL. I want to stress that, but it's at least, you know, the entry bar is a little bit lower when compared to a full-blown programming language.
Just as a clarification for people who are watching this and they hear two terms here, data lineage and data dictionary. Could you clarify what those mean?
A data dictionary is a glossary of all the different data sets that are out there in your company. And for each of the columns in the data set, it tells you what the column means and what can be found in there. So a data dictionary is essential if you have a lot of data sets and you want to make your data more accessible to people. If you don't have it, people have to ask other people, where can I find data about my customers? Or where can I find transaction data? If you have a good data dictionary, then that's the go-to place for people to find information.
And what does that look like? Is that a MySQL system, a spreadsheet, or
it depends on the implementation, and also these tools are highly in development, so it's still there's not a clear winner yet, I think. But if you have an ideal one, you should think about it as an app marketplace, like on your phone. So you have different apps, and you have ratings, and you have reviews. That's also what I think a data dictionary should look like. You have all the different data sets. Your data users, your data analysts or scientists, they rate the data sets, so you also know what's garbage and what isn't. You have the data owner that takes care of a data set and tackles issues that are reported in that app catalog, and that way it's a living document for the entire company rather than an Excel list with data sets and columns, which gets outdated if nobody maintains it. And there is nobody wanting to maintain such a list. I've seen it many, many times. Organizations that want to create a data dictionary, they appoint 20 data owners. Everybody has to enter their data sets and columns in an Excel, but after 1 month it's outdated. And nobody feels really responsible for updating it because they're too far away of the consumer. So a good data dictionary brings the consumer close to the owner.
I think also that this is a very interesting thing, right? I think we even need to go one step further there. So this needs to become part of your process, right? So whenever you're deploying a new data model, whenever you're deploying it, you know, whenever you're ingesting a new data source, you need to have some kind of check within your CCICD, which basically says, well, did you add this to the data dictionary? Did you update it? And if not, that PR merge is never going to happen, right?
Yeah, I agree.
Because I think that's the only way where you can keep this stuff up to date.
And I think this is an essential precondition for successful data governance programs. So you cannot govern your data with an Excel that has to be updated by owners.
And also
you have to have automated tooling like that tracks your data like this.
And that's exactly, for example, the way that we set up DBT as well as our machine learning. So basically our MLOps pipelines. There's always a CCICD for bringing stuff into production and bring it into staging, as well as, you know, making sure that CCICD contains all checks, which basically improve the quality, but which also improve the process of bringing this stuff into production. Okay,
gentlemen, before we move to a few use cases,
we can talk about this for hours. I think,
and it's great, but it also gives me some questions.
I think the point is the technology matured significantly too.
And I think that is a point, because if as a person without a technical background, you come into an organization, you speak with a CEO, you need to invest in data technology. That's great. Which tool should I invest in? Well, there's a dozen of tools that you need. It's getting quite complex for someone to buy into if you don't have a background in data engineering. So, what's your experience with that?
Of course, there's always the right tool for the job. Basically, the best of breed, as we call it.
Yeah, but it's again, not a single tool. If I look at this modern data stack,
no, definitely not. So of course, for example, if you work on GCP, there's always a few tools which you say, well, this is generally part of the base stack. I mean, BigQuery is one which is almost always chosen, but indeed you still need to look at your requirements, at the use case, but also at the skill of your people, right? So for example, with dashboarding, right there. So generally you want to choose a dashboarding tool where your people already have the most experience with.
Yeah, but you need to explain that to an organization why they need a stack like this.
Definitely,
just can't go for just a single supplier.
That is true. Yeah, that's true. At least that's what we believe indeed, and we need. You need to explain that. But best is to just show it, right? So we will already talk about that about the experimentation phase. Yeah. So I always, whenever we do this type of work with clients, we say, okay, please define a use case for us. And if you go to the next slide, then I can maybe depict it a little bit better, right? So this is your full-blown. Well, this is a full-blown data platform, and nowadays we are able to set up this type of stack within 2 weeks to a month, right? Then we couple it with a use case, so basically with some kind of proof of value, and then within approximately 2 months, maybe 2.5 months, you can already tell the business, okay, this was the correct decision. Let's continue with this, and let's invest in it further, or say, well, this is this just wasn't the fit, right? And I think that's a very powerful thing which we can now do.
Okay. Yeah, and I'd like to give you also a question, a quick answer. This is now the stages of the modern data stack. If we look ahead 1 year, what would be the first additional topic that would be added to this data stack? Diederik first. Could you?
So extremely complicated question, Walter.
Well, the question was simple.
Yeah, no, the question was simple. The answer is complicated. Correct. So I think there are two things which I'm let's say actively tracking, right? So one is of course MLOps, right? So for example, Vertex AI, which is still a relatively complex tool, but if set up properly, it can be very, very powerful. So that's one thing that we see more and more requests about. So I think that will become part of the modern data stack, if you will. And the other one is...
So those are tools to take a data-driven product into production and bring it to the business.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Because still a lot of companies still see experimentation that's manageable, but getting from the experimentation phase into production, there's still a lot of challenges there, right? And we encounter it multiple times at clients, and it's not just tooling, of course. There's also a lot of organization around it.
So MLOps.
And the other one is that we see, more and more requests about streaming architectures and fast data as well. So there are a couple of very interesting, open source tooling, like for example Materialize. That I think that start to become more and more interesting over time. But a lot of companies, most of the use cases are still batch-based, or near real-time. And when they talk about near real-time, we talk about hours and not really, seconds or milliseconds yet.
So there's some developments to expect in that area.
Yeah.
Stefan, if you would add another.
Yeah. I think you call this sexy trends. But if I look at the companies and that I help and struggle with. Most of them, they just want to do analytics at scale, as in analytics BI, dashboarding with Looker, Tableau, or Power BI. Yeah. And for them, it's just really essential that they want to self-service this in a way that's manageable. So the data dictionary that we just talked about, that one that's gonna be there within a year, I think, in a professional, good way that's work for everybody. It's not there yet, but that's such a high need because everybody wants to start with data governance and managing their data better because they see garbage in is garbage out, so they want to tackle the data quality. Yeah. And there's no tool for that yet that works super well. So I think that the data management field.
Thanks for sharing those. I'm also aware of the time, and we've covered so much ground already. So let's take a final look at some examples from your experiences and touch on the things that we discussed and that you can relate to these projects. I think we have a total of 3.
Yeah, one click further. Oh,
which way do you want to go?
Yeah, but the slide is just showing a couple. Show all.
There's animations.
The animation was there for another talk. And this one I just want to show everything right away.
There it is. Well, cool animation.
Don't show the animation.
All right, a use case. What are we looking at here?
So
Scale up.
Three example companies that we work for, and they have completely different tech stacks, and they have different organizational needs. So I think there's examples. They unify Diederik's maturity journey and the organizational maturity journey that I describe to show you a little bit what companies need in their different situations. Okay. And this is a scale up. So it's a relatively small company, 300, 400 people, but only 2 data analysts and small head of data that wants to do more with personalization because their bread and butter is selling products on their website, and they have a very sensitive product. It's a skincare company, and you don't want to recommend an acne-prone skincare product to someone with who wants an anti-aging skincare product because you don't want to apply the wrong stuff to your face. So it's really important that you have a personalized approach there. So they didn't have any product recommendation model to do the personalized approach.
What phase would you position them if you look at the phase?
So they are in like the initialization phase. So they asked us how can we get started with data-driven personalization? Because they did personalization with all kinds of website filters, but a user still need to click acne-prone or anti-aging. But now
cascading filtering.
If you use data-driven, then it might be pre-selected for them when they come on the website because we know them already up front or something like that. They're very small. They don't have any engineers, so to get started with a product recommendation model, we used a very simple AI ML ops framework with just Databricks on the Azure stack. I'm not sure what the Google equivalent is, but what would you say is the smallest, easiest maintainable tool that you could use to get started with when you want to get your own product recommendation model for this kind of companies?
So there's a lot out there, right? But I think that generally, most clouds are already offering, even standard APIs for this, right? Where it's literally just uploading a data set, right? And it does, but specifically for certain use cases, so not just not just generic auto ML, but just
so in this case, they started with the product recommender in Salesforce, which is a standard offering indeed. So you don't have to do any science or engineering because you can use it in your Salesforce backend of the website. But they wanted to iterate on it and see if they can do it better. So they set the next step in the maturity journey. Instead of just the click of a standard model, can we do it better with our own scientists? What do you end up with in terms of tooling?
So on GCP, you would end up with Vertex AI. Starting with of course an experimentation environment and loading in some data in there, and then going to the whole cycle of getting it into production and pushing the data or creating an endpoint which you can serve.
But you advised implementing some tools.
So this one, but then the Azure equivalent.
And there were also people working on that, but they weren't from this particular scale.
So they had a simple one data analyst. So we recommended hire a second and then upskill the people. So they followed a couple trainings. So that's on the people side. The data side, it's okay that they didn't have it well organized. We just used pretty raw feeds from Salesforce, for example.
Of clickstream data.
Just for this particular use case, it's batch overnight, so it doesn't need to be super fancy streaming right away. It can be just batch overnight. We directly reported to the executive level board, so we could clear all the blockers that were there. We worked directly together with the web team to implement the product, so that was easy. And we could do A/B testing. They already did that for other features in the website to track the benefits of the use case. So those are all the different aspects that you need to do to get the use case off the ground.
And what did it result in?
And soon you can read it in a customer success case on our website, but it's yet to be reviewed by you and published, and then it's.
But there were positive results.
It's positive results. Yeah, they want to continue.
Move towards the next level of AI maturity.
Yeah.
Let's move on to use case number 2. There we go.
Yeah.
So this is an organization who wants to democratize analytics. So they are in the third phase, I'd say, fourth phase.
Indeed. Yeah. It's like a medium-sized company. They've seen that data can influence all kinds of different components of their business, so finance, HR, operations, and they want to give people their own control and insights in what they're doing. So maybe you can say something about the different tooling that you will need at such an organization.
Yeah, and it's at this point you're really looking at your, let's say, your modern data stack and really your self-service analytics tooling.
Yeah, so the architecture diagram that we talked about.
Exactly. I think that's
typical for this type of organization.
It
needs.
You want to make it accessible, right? And it needs to be available as well, properly documented, but easy to use. Yeah. So that's
Yeah, but just the tools doesn't get you there. So we have a couple of things here that you also need to arrange. For example, on the people side, you want to learn from each other. So communities of practice could be a really good gain. People in HR, finance, and operations, they all develop best practices. So if you share it amongst each other, they will all learn a bit more. On the data side, we need to get cleaned, well-prepared data sets so that we avoid the situation with multiple definitions of the same concept. The data savvy, business leaders need to be data savvy. Yeah, I'm going to read the slides, but there's a lot of tools here.
That would be nice to hear what you did to help them to become data savvy.
Almost all of these things is what we do then. But this is already going to like a 3-year strategy plan. Because as you can see, it's not just installing the tooling within half a year or a year, but you also, to get a center of excellence, to get analytics translators, to upskill people, to install communities of practice, to get them off the ground, to clean data well in a data dictionary, to manage the data quality.
There's a huge impact.
This is a 3-year program already. So this is not something you can do out of the fly. You need to have a strategy.
Exactly. But it sounds very, very big, but you always start small, right? You always start with...
Yeah, what we recommend is you take the most mature department, so like maybe your core business activities, or maybe the operations department, or a department with a high literacy of data already, and we just see if self-service works for that department. We set up the tooling, all the other things around it, still manageable within one department. If that works, we can apply the best practices to the other departments. And that's something we see and do more often. The maturity in an organization can vary between departments, and you can cater your approach to that.
Okay, moving on to example number 3, which is a big organization with autonomous but interlinked opcos.
Yeah.
What's an opco?
Yeah, an operating company. So it's a separate business entity within the bigger organization. So let's say,
an organization that operates globally and has independent parts operating in regions, for example.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah, there are many such companies.
Okay.
And so a new tooling thing that you hear a lot in architecture landscape is the data mesh architecture. Maybe you want to explain a little bit what that is in a sentence or two. Can you do that?
I got this question more.
It's really difficult.
Actually, with a different webinar, I got the exact same question at the end. Can you explain data mesh in 2 sentences? Which is a hard thing to do.
So you did it before?
No, well, poorly. So it's just describing it in one sense, I would say that, what data mesh at least is for me, is from a technical standpoint is setting up distributed infrastructure, right? But in such a way that it becomes very, very accessible. And that means that, nowadays you hear the term self-service infrastructure more and more as well. Now, if I'm a data scientist in a different team, right, and I want to get a data science environment, that should just be 2 clicks for me. Right, and then I have that infrastructure, and there's a lot more going on with data mesh, right? It's also about there's training, and there's making data available, etc., and there are combinations between everything. But the idea is to just make it accessible in a scalable and distributed way.
So getting rid of that central component of storing data, but also decentralizing that and making data available where it is needed.
Exactly.
I would say it's decentralizing with centralized governance.
Yeah.
So you get all the central benefits, but you decentralize all the autonomy.
All right.
Yeah.
That's a data mesh. That might also be a topic for
so
different...
the tools, from technology standpoint, the implementation, of course, is huge. The central infrastructure services that you will need to set up to allow such a decentral autonomy. That takes quite some heavy engineering to create that. There's no click tool yet on the market to give me a data mesh. So it's something that needs to be created yet. But this is because if you have such an autonomous data teams, you also need to do a lot on all the different other axes of the data and maturity journey. And basically you need to implement a hub and spoke operating model with everything that comes with it.
What phase was this organization in?
Big corporate going to enterprise empowerment.
And we're not there yet, right? So also data mesh in itself is still, in my mind, still a relatively immature subject, right? It's really, really new and people are still finding it out, what does work, what doesn't work, and how do we actually tackle this, right? So we have some ideas about this, but some good ideas, I think, but there's a lot of movement still in that, on that side, basically.
Yeah. Actually, we're starting up a data mesh community in the Netherlands. So the first event will be on the 19th of October at ABN AMRO. So feel free to join.
Really cool. If you're watching this live, we'll also make sure to share the link to that event after this webinar closes. We covered so much ground. We looked at the AI maturity levels, what organizations go through, what they need to look out for. We looked at the developments of data platforms. We even looked at some upcoming trends and technologies and looked into some use cases. I can imagine if you have been watching this webinar that there's some more info you would like to dive into more as well. That's possible through 2 ebooks and white papers that we have published recently. One is a collection of articles that we have published over the course of the last 12 to 18 months, which is a practical approach to data and AI strategy. Stefan, you played a big part in compiling this document.
Yes, we are always like to share knowledge, like we're doing now, but we also blog a lot. So if you follow our blog, you will have seen most of the articles in here, but this is a collection of it.
Great. And then we also have the AI maturity journey white paper.
And we even have another white paper about data democratization that might be very relevant for the listeners of this session.
Great. So we'll also make sure to share those.
Check out the website.
Links. Yeah. Great stuff. What we covered today, you don't only want to build it, but you also want to be able to run it and make your organization love the things you build. Diederik, Stefan, thank you so much for sharing your insights and demonstrating how you enable organizations to make the most out of their data.
Cool.
Thank you for watching, and make sure to tune in to our next one. Thank you.
Thank you.